The house stood like a rotting tooth in the jaw of the valley. It was decades ago, back when the land was hard and the people were harder. The brigade, the local work unit that decided where you lived, where you worked, and how much grain you took home, had assigned the Guo family to the property. It wasn't a kindness. It was a logistical necessity. The Guo family was large. There was Ju, the eldest son, barely on the cusp of manhood but already carrying the weight of a father on his shoulders. Beneath him were 3 siblings, 2 sisters and a little brother, the youngest only 4 years old. Life in those days was a cycle of crushing monotony. It was a existence defined by the sun. Before the first gray light of dawn touched the horizon, the parents were up. They moved like sleepwalkers, their bodies stiff from the previous day's labor, dragging themselves out to the fields. They didn't return until the sky was a bruised purple, and the sun had long since died behind the mountains. This was the rhythm of survival. You worked until your bones felt like they were grinding against each other, dust against dust. You came home not to live, but to collapse. Hunger was a constant companion. Fatigue was the master. When the parents returned, they didn't have the energy to speak, let alone love. They ate in silence, shoveling meager portions of grain into their mouths, and then fell onto the times the large, brick sleeping platform heated from below as if shot dead. The house they had been given was an upgrade in space, but a downgrade in spirit. It had belonged to a wealthy landowner, a local tyrant in the parlance of the times, whose fortune had been stripped away along with his life. The structure was old. It smelled of wet earth, unwashed wool, and something sweeter, something cloying, like flowers left too long on a grave. There were 3 rooms. The parents took the inner chamber, a small, suffocating box where they could lock away the world. Ju and his 3 siblings took the main room, the outer chamber. It was cavernous, dominated by a massive Kang times, that stretched wall to wall. But it was the third element of the house that drew the eye. At the foot of the children's sleeping platform, there was a doorway. It didn't have a solid door. Instead, a heavy, coarse cloth curtain hung there, separating the sleeping quarters from a storage room filled with the detritus of the previous owners. Broken tools, ceramic jars, piles of old straw. The darkness behind that curtain felt pressurized. It felt heavy. They had been living there for 2 weeks, half a month of settling into the shadows. It started with the cold. Jiu couldn't pinpoint exactly when the sleep stopped being restful. It was a gradual erosion. At first, it was just a restlessness, a tossing and turning that he attributed to the new environment. But then, the temperature shifted. It was early autumn. The days were still warm, the sun capable of burning the back of your neck. Even the nights were mild, the kind of weather where a single thin quilt should have been enough. But in that outer room, on that wide brick bed, winter seemed to live in the air. Jiu began waking up in the dead center of the night. It wasn't a sudden awakening, no gasping for air. It was a slow rise to consciousness, brought on by a seeping, biting chill. It started at his feet and worked its way up, a frost that seemed to bypass the skin and settle directly into the marrow. He would lie there, teeth chattering softly so as not to wake the others, pulling the thin cotton quilt up to his nose. He wasn't the only one. He would hear the rustling of his sisters, the soft whimpers of his little brother. They were all freezing, huddled together like a litter of puppies, seeking heat that the house refused to hold. Then came the sound. It was the 3rd or 4th night of the cold spell. The silence of the countryside was absolute. No cars, no machinery, just the wind and the settling timber of the old house. Jiu was lying on his back, staring up into the pitch blackness of the rafters, waiting for sleep to take him. Hey, it was faint, a scratch on the silence. Jiu froze. His heart hammered a sudden, violent rhythm against his ribs. He held his breath, listening. Maybe it was a rat? A weasel in the walls? He. It wasn't an animal. It was a laugh, a human laugh. It was light, airy, and distinctively female. It sounded like a secret being shared in a church, hushed but vibrating with amusement. Who laughs in the middle of the night in a house locked tight against the world? Jiu slowly turned his head. The movement felt agonizingly loud. the friction of his hair against the pillow sounding like sandpaper. He looked at his siblings. In the dim moonlight filtering through the papered windows, he could see their outlines. They were motionless, the deep, rhythmic breathing of the exhausted. He strained his ears, pushing his senses out into the room. Silence. Maybe he was crazy. Maybe the exhaustion was finally cracking his mind, just as it had broken his parents' bodies. He let out a long, shaky breath and closed his eyes. Asterisk. Go to sleep, Jiu. Just go to sleep. Asterisk. Hey, hey. The sound was right there. It wasn't outside. It wasn't in the walls. It was in the room. The laughter trickled down his spine like ice water. It was wet, intimate, and close. So close. It sounded as if someone were kneeling on the Times Kang asterisk, leaning over him, laughing directly into the space just behind his ear. The air in the room dropped 10 degrees in a second. Jiu felt the hair on his arms stand up, rigid as wire. A sensation of pure, distilled dread washed over him. He felt exposed. He felt watched. He felt that if he moved, he would die. But the human instinct to know, to see the predator, was overwhelming. Behind him, the sound was coming from the foot of the bed, near the curtain. Jiu began to turn. He didn't want to. His body screamed at him to stay still, to play dead. But his neck moved on its own accord. Inch by agonizing inch, he rotated his head toward the foot of the Times Kang asterisk. The room was dark, but the moonlight carved shapes out of the gloom. He could see the outline of the door frame. He could see the heavy drape of the cloth curtain. And he saw them. His breath caught in his throat, choking him. His heart seemed to stop, seizing in his chest like a fist. Standing there, just in front of the curtain, were two women. They were not transparent. They were not misty wisps of imagination. They were solid. They were real. And they were terrifyingly out of place. They stood shoulder to shoulder, leaning against the wall with a casual, languid grace. They were looking at him. One wore shoes of pink satin, embroidered with intricate patterns. The other wore red satin. Their trousers were loose, made of pink silk that shimmered in the low light. They wore matching tunics, with wide sleeves, and high, stiff collars that choked their necks. On the chests of their tunics, massive peonies were embroidered in thread that looked like dried blood. The hems of their clothes were trimmed with red beaded tassels that swayed slightly, though there was no breeze. Their hair was slicked back, oiled until it shone like black glass, held in place with jade hairpins. But it was their faces that destroyed Jiu's sanity. They were white, not the pale skin of a sickly person, but the flat, dead white of paper or fresh dough. Stark, unnatural white. Against this canvas, their lips were painted a small, cruel crimson, and they were smiling. They were looking directly at him, their eyes dark voids, their red lips curled up in a hideous, mocking simper. They waved, slowly, their hands, pale and slender, beckoned to him. Hey, hey. The laughter bubbled out of those painted mouths. Jiu blinked. He squeezed his eyes shut so hard that stars exploded behind his lids. Asterisk. Wake up! Wake up! This is a nightmare. Asterisk. He rubbed his eyes with his fists, digging into the sockets until it hurt. He opened them. They were still there. The woman in the red shoes tilted her head, the tassels on her tunic swaying. She waved again, her fingers curling, inviting him into the darkness behind the curtain. This was not a dream. The cold was real. The smell, that cloying floral scent of decay, was real. Terror, primal and electric, exploded in Jiu's brain. Memor. The scream tore out of his throat, raw and jagged. It shattered the silence of the house. Beside him, his sisters and little brother bolted upright, wailing in confusion. The sound of running footsteps thundered from the inner room. The door burst open, and his father stood there, holding a flickering oil lamp, his face a mask of exhausted fury and fear. What? What is it? What happened? His father roared, the lamplight swinging wildly, casting monstrous shadows against the walls. Jiu pointed. His hand shook so violently he couldn't steady it. There! The women by the curtain! The father swung the lamp toward the storage room. The light washed over the peeling walls, the dusty floor, the heavy cloth curtain. There was nothing, just dust motes dancing in the yellow light. The pink and red satin, the white faces, the oiled hair gone. "There's nothing there," his father growled, lowering the lamp. The fear in his face was replaced by annoyance. "I saw them," Ju cried, tears streaming down his face. "Two women, with white faces. They were laughing at me. They were waving." His mother appeared behind his father, clutching her shawl. "You're dreaming, Ju. It's the house. It's new. You're just not used to it." "It wasn't a dream," Ju insisted, his voice cracking. "I rubbed my eyes. I pinched myself. They were real." "Enough," his father barked. The man was swaying on his feet, the bone-deep fatigue making him short-tempered. "We have to be in the fields in 4 hours. Stop scaring your brothers and sisters with this nonsense. Go back to sleep." "But..." "Sleep." The parents retreated. The door to the inner room clicked shut. The latch slid home. Ju was left in the darkness. The silence returned, but now it was heavy with threat. His siblings, terrified by his scream, eventually drifted back into uneasy slumber, their breathing hitching with occasional sobs. Ju did not sleep. He pulled the quilt over his head, curling into a tight ball. He squeezed his eyes shut, his hands clamped over his ears. He lay there, rigid, trembling, waiting for the laughter to start again. He waited for the cold hand to pull the covers away. He stayed that way until the rooster crowed, signaling the misery of a new day. The next day was a blur of gray exhaustion. Ju moved through his chores like a machine with rusted gears. He carried water. He chopped wood. But his mind was back in that room, staring at the empty space by the curtain. Night fell too quickly. The sun seemed to flee the valley, leaving them to the mercy of the shadows. Ju dreaded the bed. He dreaded the times, Kang asterisk. But his body betrayed him. He was young, and he had worked all day. As soon as he lay down, a heavy, black sleep claimed him. But the house was not done with him. In the deepest trench of the night, the sound returned. "Hey, hey," Ju snapped awake. The transition from sleep to wakefulness was instant this time. No grogginess, just pure adrenaline. He didn't open his eyes. He didn't dare. He felt the cold. It was pressing against his back. It was freezing. A block of ice radiating chill directly into his spine. "Hey, hey." The laughter was right behind him, inches away. He could hear the wet click of a tongue against teeth. He could feel the movement of air as the mouth formed the sounds. They were on the bed. They were lying behind him, Ju's entire body locked up. He stopped breathing. He realized with a jolt of horror that he was facing the wall. His back was exposed to the room, exposed to them. He knew, with a certainty that bypassed logic, that if he turned around, he would be face to face with that white, doughy skin. He would smell the old flowers. He squeezed his eyes tighter, his eyelids trembling. Asterisk. Don't move. If you don't move, they can't hurt you. Asterisk. But the fear was a physical weight. It was crushing his lungs. He needed an anchor. He needed to know he was alive. Slowly, agonizingly, he slid his hand under the covers. He reached out blindly until his fingers brushed the warm, small hand of his younger sister sleeping beside him. He gripped it. He held on as if he were dangling over a cliff. The warmth of her hand was the only real thing in the universe. The laughter continued for a long time, soft, mocking, patient, and then it stopped. Ju didn't let go of his sister's hand until the morning light turned the paper windows gray. Sleep deprivation began to take its toll. By the third day, Ju was hallucinating in the daylight. Trees looked like people. The wind sounded like whispering. He was resting against a tree during a break from gathering fodder, his eyelids drooping. He drifted off for a second and jerked awake, convinced he felt cold fingers on his neck. "What's wrong with you, boy?" his father scolded, passing by with a heavy load of grain. "You're moving like an old man. Get to work." Ju didn't argue. He couldn't explain. They wouldn't listen. That evening, he was alone on the road. His parents had gone ahead to prepare the meal. He was walking back with a basket of grass strapped to his back. the weight digging into his shoulders. The moon was full, a bright, unblinking eye staring down at the valley. The road was a ribbon of silver dust. Jiu walked fast. He wanted to be inside, even if the inside was haunted. At least inside there was light. He looked down at his feet, watching the dust kick up around his cloth shoes. The moon cast his shadow in front of him, a long, stretched distortion of his figure. He took a step. The shadow took a step. He took another step. And then he stopped. There were two shadows. Jiu stared at the ground. The blood drained from his face. Stretching out from his heels were two distinct black shapes. One was his, the basket on the back, the messy hair. The other was different. It was slender. It had wide sleeves. And the head looked like it had ornaments in it. Jiu spun around. The road behind him was empty. Just the wind blowing through the crops. No one. Nothing. He turned back around. One shadow. Just his. He let out a breath. A ragged, whimpering sound. "Just eyes," he whispered. "Just tired eyes." He took 3 more steps. He looked down. 2 shadows. The second one was closer this time. It seemed to be leaning into his shadow, merging with it, as if whispering to it. "Ah!" Jiu screamed and broke into a run. The basket bounced violently against his back, bruising his spine. He didn't care. He sprinted, his lungs burning, his eyes fixed on the distant yellow glow of his house's windows. "Mom! Dad!" he screamed. Into the night. He ran, and he made the mistake of looking down. The second shadow was running with him. It was effortless. While his shadow jerked and bobbed with his exertion, the second shadow glided. It flowed over the rocks and ruts of the road like oil. "Dad, help me!" He burst through the courtyard gate, collapsing against the wooden post, gasping for air. His parents ran out of the house, alarmed by the noise. Jiu threw himself at them, grabbing his father's arm, shaking uncontrollably. "Two! There were 2!" he babbled, pointing at the ground. Look at my shadow. There's 2 of them. It was following me." His father pulled his arm away, looking at the ground. The moonlight was bright in the yard. "What are you talking about?" his father said, his voice thick with irritation. "Look." Jiu looked down. One shadow. Alone. Trembling slightly as he trembled. But, Jiu stammered. "It was there. On the road. A woman's shadow. Wide sleeves. It was right next to me." His mother stepped forward, her hand raised. "You are seeing things. You are hysterical. Do you want the neighbors to think we are raising a madman?" She swiped at him, a half-hearted slap that missed his face but stung his pride. "I'm not crazy," Jiu shouted, nearing a breakdown. I swear on my life. I saw it." "Enough," his father roared. "Get inside. Eat. Sleep. Not another word about ghosts or shadows or women. Do you hear me?" Jiu swallowed his terror. It tasted like bile. "Yes," he whispered. The pattern was set. The days were for exhaustion. The nights were for terror. The parents announced they would be leaving the next day. A distant relative needed help with a harvest, or perhaps it was a brigade meeting in the next town. Jiu didn't catch the details. All he heard was that he and his siblings would be alone in the house for the day. "Lock the doors," his father said over dinner. "Stay inside. We'll be back by evening." Jiu nodded, staring into his bowl of watery gruel. He wasn't hungry. Bedtime came like a sentence. Jiu enacted his ritual. He lay down, pulled the covers up, and immediately reached for his sister's hand. Gripping her fingers was the only thing that kept his heart from hammering out of his chest. The darkness settled. The house groaned. Jiu lay there, halfway between wakefulness and the dark pit of sleep. He was drifting, his mind unspooling. The cold came first. It was aggressive tonight. It didn't seep. It rushed. It flooded the Kang times like a tide of freezing water. Jiu stirred, trying to pull his hand back under the quilt, but his limbs felt heavy, leaden, sleep paralysis. He knew the feeling, but knowing didn't help. He couldn't move. He could only breathe and see. Through his eyelashes, he saw the room. The moonlight was brighter tonight, casting long, sharp shadows. He felt a pressure on the mattress. Something had climbed onto the Times Kang asterisk. Squish, squish, the sound of soft shoes on the bedding. Jiu tried to scream, but his throat was paralyzed. He could only make a low, gurgling sound. The cold presence moved closer. It was looming over him, and then he felt it. A hand. It was impossibly cold. It felt like a slab of raw meat taken straight from the snow. The hand landed softly on his forehead. It was damp. It slid down his face, slowly, deliberately. The palm covered his eyes, then his nose, then his mouth. It smelled of earth and old powder. It caressed his cheek, moving from the left side to the right. A slow, mocking stroke. The touch broke the paralysis. Jiu exploded into motion. "Get off!" he thrashed, throwing his arms up, his scream tearing his throat raw. He opened his eyes. For a split second, suspended in the pale light, he saw it. A woman. She was kneeling right beside him. Her face was inches from his. She was pulling her hand back, her long sleeve trailing over his chest. That white face, that red mouth. She was grinning. A wide, impossible grin that showed too many teeth. And then she dissolved into the shadows as the siblings woke up screaming. "What is it? What is it?" his sister cried, clutching him. Jiu scrambled backward, pressing himself against the wall, pointing a shaking finger at the curtain. "She touched me. She touched my face." His little brother started wailing. His sisters were crying. The chaos was absolute. The door to the inner room flew open. His parents again, angry again, tired again. "What now?" his father shouted, slamming the lamp onto the table. "A hand," Jiu sobbed, scrubbing his face as if to wash off the cold. "She touched me. A cold hand. It went right across my face. I saw her. She was right there." His mother looked at him, then at the terrified younger children. For the first time, there was a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. But fatigue won out. "It was a nightmare, Jiu. You're obsessing." "It wasn't," Jiu screamed. "Look at me. I'm awake. She was here." His father sighed, a sound of deep, rattling exhaustion. "Fine, fine. If you're so scared, come sleep in here, all of you." They piled into the small inner room. It was cramped, smelling of sweat and unwashed bodies. But to Jiu, it was a fortress. He squeezed into the corner, knees to his chest, and didn't close his eyes until the sun came up. Morning brought a false sense of security. The sun was bright, the shadows retreated. The parents left early, locking the courtyard gate from the outside. "Don't open the door for anyone," his mother warned. Jiu was left in charge. He was the man of the house. He was terrified. They stayed in the inner room for hours, afraid to venture out into the main chamber. But hunger eventually forced them out. Jiu made a simple meal, his eyes darting to the curtain every few seconds. They ate on the Kang Times in the main room, huddled together. "Is she gone?" his little sister asked, her voice a whisper. "I don't know," Jiu said. He stood up to gather the bowls. He walked to the kitchen area, which was near the door leading to the courtyard. "Brother!" His sister's scream was sharp, piercing. Jiu spun around. She was pointing at the wooden door that led to the outside. The heavy wooden door was bolted shut, but there was a crack, a gap between the door and the frame, where the wood had warped with age. Jiu looked. His blood turned to ice. Pressed against the crack, from the outside, was a face. It was white, dead white. It had a greenish tint to it, like mold growing on stale bread. It was mashed against the wood, flattening the nose, and there was an eye. A single, dark, unblinking eye, staring through the crack, looking directly into the room, looking at them. "Ah!" The children screamed in unison. They scrambled back, scrambling up the Kang asterisk, diving under the quilts. They huddled there, a trembling lump of terror. They could hear nothing but their own heartbeats and the wind outside. "Is it gone?" his brother whispered after an eternity. "Shh," Jiu hissed. They waited. 10 minutes. 20. Finally, the second sister, the brave one, peeked out from under the quilt. She looked at the door. "I don't see it," she whispered. Jiu slowly lowered the blanket. The crack in the door was just a crack. Sunlight was streaming through it. He exhaled. Maybe it's gone. He climbed off the Times Kang asterisk. His legs felt like jelly. He grabbed a heavy wooden ladle as a weapon. He crept toward the door. He peered through the crack. Nothing. Just the empty courtyard. He checked the window. Nothing. He let out a nervous laugh. It's gone! See? Nobody there. The tension in the room broke. His siblings sat up, wiping their tears. I want Mom, the youngest whined. They'll be back soon, Ju said, trying to sound brave. And then the little sister screamed again. She was looking at the door to the storage room, the one with the curtain. Ju whipped his head around. The curtain was pulled slightly aside. In the gap between the curtain and the doorframe, low to the ground, was the face. It was inside. It was the same face, white as paper, greenish hue. It was staring at them. And then, slowly, a hand appeared. A pale hand with long, dark fingernails. It gripped the edge of the doorframe. The laughter filled the room. Ju didn't think. He didn't breathe. Run. He grabbed his brother. His sisters scrambled after him. They bolted for the inner room, throwing themselves inside and slamming the door. Ju threw the bolt, his hand shaking so hard he almost missed the latch. They backed into the furthest corner of the room, climbing onto the parents' small Times Kang asterisk, pressing themselves into the plaster of the wall. They waited. They heard footsteps in the outer room. Slow, dragging, asterisk, squish, squish, asterisk. They heard the sound of fingernails scratching against the wood of their door. Scritch, scritch, scritch. Open up, a voice whispered. It wasn't his mother's voice. It sounded like dry leaves skittering on stone. Open up, little ones. The children held their breath, tears streaming silently down their faces. Hours passed. The sun began to dip. The scratching stopped. The silence returned. Then, a new sound. Banging. Loud, rhythmic banging on the outer courtyard gate. Two, open the gate. It was his father. Open up. Why is it locked? What are you doing in there? Real, human voices. Anger. Life. Ju let out a sob. He scrambled off the bed, unbolted the inner door, and ran into the main room. He didn't look at the curtain. He didn't look at the corners. He sprinted to the outer door, threw back the bolt, and burst into the courtyard. His parents were standing there, looking furious. What is wrong with you? His mother scolded. We've been knocking for 10 minutes. Why didn't you open the door? Ju didn't answer. He couldn't. He just pointed. He pointed back into the house. Through the open door, past the main room, in the dark rectangle of the kitchen area near the stove. The woman was standing there. She wasn't hiding anymore. She was standing in full view, tall and imposing, in her red and pink satin. Her face was a mask of malice. She was looking right at the parents. Ju's father froze. The scowl dropped from his face. His mouth fell open. His mother gasped, dropping the basket she was holding. They saw her. Finally, they saw her. The woman tilted her head. Her neck cracked audibly. She raised a sleeve to her mouth. Hey. And then, staring directly at Ju's father, she began to walk forward. The father did not move. He was a man carved from the hard earth of the valley, a man who believed in sweat, in grain, and in the tangible weight of a plow. But as the woman in the red tunic glided toward him, the physics of his world dissolved. She did not walk so much as flow, the hem of her silk trousers brushing the dirt floor with a sound like dry leaves skittering over stone. The air around the stove, usually warm from the dying embers of the morning fire, turned instantly frigid. It was a cold that smelled of stagnant water and musk. Jiu watched from the courtyard, his hand gripping the door frame until his knuckles turned white. He saw his father's mouth work, trying to form a word, a curse, a prayer, anything to break the silence. But no sound came. The father was paralyzed, pinned like an insect under a glass jar. The woman stopped less than a foot from him. Up close, her face was a topography of ruin. The white powder on her skin was cracked, revealing something gray and wet beneath. She leaned in, her neck elongating unnaturally. bringing her painted red lips to the father's ear. She didn't speak. She didn't scream. She simply inhaled. It was a long, rattling intake of breath, as if she were savoring the scent of his fear, or perhaps drawing the heat directly out of his blood. Then, the father's knees buckled. He collapsed, not in a faint, but as if the strings holding him upright had been severed. At the exact moment his body hit the floor, the woman vanished. She didn't fade. She simply ceased to occupy the space. 1 second she was a solid, terrifying mass of silk and malice. The next, there was only dust motes swirling in a shaft of dying sunlight. "Dad!" Jiu's scream broke the spell. He and his mother rushed into the kitchen. The father was groaning, clutching his chest, his skin the color of old ash. He looked up at them, his eyes wide and wet, stripped of all authority. "Pack!" he wheezed. His voice was a broken rasp. "Get the bedding! Get the children into the inner room, now." There was no discussion of hallucinations. There were no accusations of hysteria. The barrier of denial had been shattered, and now they were all drowning in the same dark water. That night, the house became a siege engine. The father nailed the door to the storage room shut. He used long, rusted iron spikes, hammering them into the wood with a violence that shook the walls. Asterisk, bang, 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 asterisk. The sound echoed through the valley, a desperate percussion against the encroaching night. They abandoned the outer room entirely. The family of 6 squeezed into the small inner chamber. It was a suffocatingly tight fit. The Kang Times here was narrow, meant for 2 people, not 6. They lay like sardines, limbs tangled, breathing each other's air. Jiu lay on the edge, pressed against the rough plaster wall. His father lay on the outer edge, clutching a heavy iron spade to his chest. The oil lamp was left burning, a wasteful extravagance that spoke volumes about their terror. But walls and nails mean nothing to things that do not breathe. The torment shifted. It was no longer about visual terror. It was about auditory erosion. Around midnight, the sounds began. It wasn't the laughter this time. It was the domesticity of the dead. From the outer room, the room they had abandoned, came the sounds of a household waking up. They heard the distinct clink times of ceramic bowls being set on a table. They heard the time-scraped times of a ladle against the bottom of a wok. They heard the soft, rhythmic thump, times of footsteps pacing back and forth, the sound of fabric swishing against fabric. It sounded like a busy kitchen. It sounded like a family preparing a meal. Jiu lay with his eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling beams. Beside him, his mother was weeping silently, her body shaking with suppressed sobs. His father gripped the spade, his knuckles white, but he did not move. He knew, just as Jiu knew, that the spade would be useless. Then came the voices. They were muffled, unintelligible, like a radio tuned between stations, a low murmur of conversation, a man's deep rumble, a woman's sharp retort, and then, cutting through it all, the giggling. Hey. It drifted through the cracks in the door, sliding into the inner room like poisonous smoke. The youngest sister, Little Flower, sat up in the darkness. She was 4 years old, a round-faced child with bright eyes, who usually slept like a stone. She sat up, stared at the locked door, and smiled. "They're eating," she said. Her voice was clear, calm, and utterly devoid of fear. "Hush!" the mother hissed, clamping a hand over the child's mouth. "Go to sleep." Little Flower pulled her mother's hand away. "They want me to sing," she whispered. "The lady in the red shoes says I have a pretty voice." The temperature in the inner room plummeted. "Don't listen to them," Jiu whispered, reaching out to touch his sister's shoulder. "Don't talk to them." Little Flower looked at him. In the flickering light of the oil lamp, her eyes seemed too dark. The pupils were dilated, swallowing the iris. She didn't look like his sister. She looked like a doll that had been left out in the rain. "She says she likes my shoes," Little Flower said dreamily. "But she says hers are prettier." The days bled into a gray haze of fatigue and dread. The parents still went to work, the brigade demanded it, and starvation was a ghost that killed faster than spirits. But they moved like sleepwalkers. They left Jiu to guard the house, locking him and the younger children inside. The deterioration of Little Flower was rapid and terrifying. It wasn't a sickness of the body. At first, it was a displacement of the soul. She stopped playing. She would sit for hours on the edge of the Times Kang asterisk, staring at the wall that separated them from the outer room. She would tilt her head, listening to conversations that only she could hear. Sometimes, Ju would catch her whispering. "No, I can't come out yet," she would murmur. "Brother locked the door." "Yes, I know. Yes, red is a nice color." Ju tried to distract her. He made shadow puppets on the wall. He told her stories, but she would just look at him with that flat, distant stare, as if he were the ghost and she was the one anchored in reality. One afternoon, the brigade leader sent a message. A group of cadres officials from the district were coming to inspect the harvest. They would be dining at the Guo house. It was an honor, a burden, and a command. The parents came home early, their faces masks of panic. To refuse the cadres was political suicide. To host them in a haunted house was madness, but they had no choice. "Clean the outer room," the father ordered, his voice trembling. "Open the windows. Let the sun in." They scrubbed the house. They moved the table back into the center of the main room. They pretended the cold spot near the curtain didn't exist. They pretended the smell of rotting flowers wasn't clinging to the rafters. The cadres arrived at sunset. 4 men in green uniforms, loud, boisterous, smelling of tobacco and authority. They sat at the table, drinking the family's meager supply of liquor, eating the eggs that had been saved for months. Jiu stood in the corner, holding the kettle, watching. He felt the tension in the room like a physical weight. The shadows were lengthening. The sun was dying. "Where are the children?" one of the cadres asked, his face flushed with drink. "I heard you have a little girl who can sing." The mother froze. She is shy." "Nonsense," the cadre boomed. "Bring her out. Let her sing a revolutionary song for us." There was no refusing. The mother went to the inner room and brought out Little Flower. The child walked into the main room. She didn't look at her parents. She didn't look at the cadres. Her eyes went immediately to the empty corner by the storage room curtain. She smiled and gave a small wave. The cadres didn't notice. They were too busy pouring drinks. "Come here, little one," the official said. "Sing for us." Little Flower stood in the center of the room. She smoothed her tunic. She clasped her hands behind her back. Her posture was perfect, too perfect. It wasn't the posture of a 4-year-old peasant girl. It was the stance of a performer. She opened her mouth. The voice that came out was not hers. It was high, shrill, and piercing. It wasn't a revolutionary anthem about tractors and grain production. It was a slow, mournful melody, sung in a dialect that Jiu barely recognized, an old operatic style from a time before the revolution. Asterisk. The peony blooms in the frost. Asterisk. Asterisk. The red shoes walk on the snow. Asterisk. Asterisk. The master sleeps in the cold earth. Asterisk. Asterisk. But the bride has nowhere to go. Asterisk. The room went silent. The cadres stopped chewing. The air grew heavy and cold, the breath misting in front of their faces. Little Flower sang with her eyes closed, swaying slightly. The sound was beautiful and terrible. It vibrated in the bones. As she hit the high note, the oil lamp in the center of the table flickered violently. The flame turned green. Pop! The glass chimney of the lamp shattered. Darkness rushed in. "What the hell?" one of the cadres shouted, knocking over his chair. In the sudden gloom, Jiu saw them. Standing behind Little Flower, emerging from the shadows of the curtain, were the 2 women. They were solid. They were watching the performance with rapt attention. One of them reached out a pale, long-fingered hand and stroked Little Flower's hair. "Light! Get a light!" the father screamed. Jiu fumbled for a match, striking it against the wall. The flare of phosphorus illuminated the room. The women were gone. Little Flower was standing there, looking confused, rubbing her eyes. "Mama?" she said, her voice back to being a child's small whimper. "I'm cold." The cadres left abruptly. They didn't finish the meal. They muttered about drafts and faulty lamps, but their eyes were wide with a primal fear they couldn't name. They fled the house as if it were burning. The decline accelerated. The next morning, Little Flower couldn't stand up. Her skin had turned a waxy yellow, and her eyes were sunken into dark hollows. She lay on the Kang Times in the inner room, wrapped in 3 quilts, yet she shivered violently. "I have to go," she told Jiu when he brought her a bowl of warm water. "Go where?" Jiu asked, his heart hammering. "You're sick. You need to rest." "No," she said, shaking her head on the pillow. "They are waiting for me. The sedan chair is coming. I have to go." "Who is waiting?" "The sisters," she whispered. "They say the master wants to see me. They say I have to go before the sun goes down." By late afternoon, she was fading. Her breathing was shallow, a dry rattle in her throat. "Hungry," she rasped. "Brother, I'm hungry." "I'll get you food," Jiu said. "I have a corn bun. I'll heat it up for you." "Hurry," she said. Her eyes were fixed on the ceiling. "The music is starting. Can't you hear the drums? They are almost here." Jiu ran to the kitchen. It was late afternoon, the light already failing. He grabbed a cold, hard corn bun from the basket. He shoved kindling into the stove. He grabbed the box of matches. He struck a match. Asterisk. Flee. Asterisk. It flared and died instantly. He struck another. The head crumbled. He struck a third. It lit, a small yellow flame. He brought it to the dry straw. The moment the flame touched the straw, a gust of wind blew down the chimney. It wasn't a natural draft. It was a sharp, focused exhalation. The flame was snuffed out. "No," she whimpered. "No, please." He struck 2 matches together. The flame roared. He shielded it with his body, shoving it deep into the stove. The straw hissed. It wouldn't catch. It was dry, but it acted as if it were waterlogged. From the inner room, Little Flower's voice drifted out, weak and thin. "Hurry, brother. They are opening the gate." Jiu was sobbing now. He struck the entire box. A flare of heat. He threw the burning box into the stove. The fire died. It was suffocated. "Father!" Jiu screamed, running into the yard. "Help! The fire won't light!" His father was returning from the fields, accompanied by his older brother, Jiu's big uncle. The uncle was a massive man, a former militia leader, known for his temper and his strength. He strode into the kitchen, seeing the pile of unburnt matches. "Useless boy," the uncle growled. He grabbed a handful of straw and a flint. He struck the steel. Sparks flew. Nothing. The straw refused to burn. "It's them," Jiu whispered. "They won't let her eat. They want her to go hungry." The uncle's face darkened. He grabbed the cold, hard bun. "She eats it cold then." They ran into the inner room. Little Flower was staring at the corner of the room, her eyes wide and unblinking. She was smiling, a beatific, terrifying smile. "Look," she whispered. "The red lanterns. So many lanterns." "Eat!" the mother cried, pressing the hard bun to the child's lips. "Eat, my baby!" Little Flower took a bite. She chewed slowly, her eyes never leaving the empty corner. "Good," she whispered. "I'm ready." She swallowed. Then, her body arched. Her head threw back against the pillow with a violence that cracked the neck vertebrae. Her eyes rolled up, showing only the whites. She let out a long, sighing breath. "Dime." The sound came from her throat, but it wasn't her voice. Then she went limp. The silence that followed was absolute. The uncle roared, a sound of pure fury. He grabbed the box of matches from Jiu's hand. He struck one. It lit instantly. The flame burned bright and steady. He threw it into the stove in the kitchen. The fire roared to life, consuming the straw, mocking them with its warmth. Jiu looked at the floor near the Kang asterisk. In the dust accumulated in the corner where Little Flower had been staring, there were footprints. They were small, about 3 inches long, pointed at the toe. The footprints of bound feet. In the valley, when a child died young, they were not buried. The superstition was cruel but pragmatic. A child who died was a debt unpaid, a bad spirit. To bury them was to trap the bad luck in the family soil. They were to be taken to the wild dog slope, wrapped in a straw mat, left for the wolves and the crows. The faster the body was consumed, the faster the soul would reincarnate. It was a savage custom, but the parents were broken. They followed the tradition. The father and the uncle wrapped little Flower's small body in an old reed mat. They tied it with rough hemp rope. They carried her out into the twilight. Jiu watched them go, his heart a hollowed-out stone. He sat in the kitchen, staring at the roaring fire that was too late to save her. They returned an hour later. They didn't speak. They washed their hands in a basin of water and sat in the dark. But the horror was not over. It was only evolving. That night, the house felt empty, yet heavy. The oppressive presence in the storage room seemed to have expanded, filling every crack and crevice. Jiu lay awake. He couldn't close his eyes. Around 2 a.m., he heard it. Pat, pat, pat. Footsteps. Small, light footsteps. They were coming from the courtyard. They stopped at the front door. Scritch. The sound of small fingernails scratching against the wood. "Mama," a voice whispered. It was little Flower, but it sounded hollow, echoing, as if spoken through a long metal pipe. "Mama, I'm cold. Open the door." The mother sat up, screaming. She lunged for the door, but the father tackled her, holding her down. "It's not her," he sobbed. "It's not her. Don't open it. It's my baby. She's back. She's not dead. She is dead. That isn't her." The scratching continued for an hour. Then the footsteps moved away. Asterisk, pat, 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 asterisk, fading into the night. The next morning, the father and uncle went to the slope. They needed to see if the wolves had done their work. They returned, pale and shaking. The mat was open. The father whispered to the mother, "The wolves. They didn't touch her. Not a bite." "She is whole?" the mother asked, hope flaring in her eyes. "She is whole," the uncle said grimly. "But she moved." "Moved? We left her facing the east," the uncle said, his voice dropping to a rumble. "But she was turned. Her body, it was turned toward the house. Her eyes were open, looking this way." They went back. They tied the mat tighter. They weighed it down with rocks. The second night was worse. The footsteps entered the house. The door had been bolted, but they heard the times pat, pat, pat times inside the outer room. They heard the clinking of the spoon. They heard the sound of chewing. Jiu lay against the wall, listening to the thing that wore his sister's face, eating in the darkness just a few feet away. He could hear the wet, smacking sound of lips. "Hey, hey." The laughter was now a duet. 2 adult voices and 1 child's voice. By the third day, the air in the valley felt like lead. The sun shone, but gave no heat. The uncle arrived at noon. He carried a large jug of kerosene and a bundle of dry wood. His face was set in stone. "This ends today," he said. "The wolves won't eat her. The crows won't touch her. That means she is not meat anymore. She is a vessel." "What are you doing?" the mother cried, clutching the doorframe. "Fire," the uncle said. "Fire purifies." They marched up the slope. Jiu followed. He didn't want to see, but he couldn't look away. Little Flower lay on the slope. The mat was untied again. The rocks had been rolled away. She looked exactly as she had the moment she died. Her skin was not gray. It was rosy. Her cheeks were flushed. She looked like she was sleeping comfortably. But she had moved again. She had crawled 10 feet down the slope, closer to the village, closer to the house. The uncle built a pyre of wood. He placed the small body on top. He doused it in kerosene. "Forgive me," the uncle whispered. He threw the torch. The fire erupted with a times whoosh, times that sucked the air out of the valley. Black smoke billowed up, thick and oily. And then, Jiu saw it. As the flames licked the skin, the body did not char. It reacted. Little Flower sat up. She sat bolt upright in the center of the inferno. She turned her head slowly, scanning the group. Her eyes opened. They were gone, burned away, leaving only black, empty sockets. She opened her mouth. A sound came out that was not a scream. It was a screech, like metal grinding on metal, magnified 1,000 times. It was the sound of something ancient and angry being evicted. The body thrashed. It flailed its arms, beating against the flames. It tried to crawl off the pyre. "Burn!" the uncle roared, using a long stick to push the body back into the heart of the fire. "Burn, you demon!" The struggle lasted for minutes that felt like hours. Finally, the structure of the body collapsed. The screaming stopped. The fire consumed everything, leaving only white ash and bone. The family moved the next day. They left the furniture. They left the grain. They took only their clothes and fled to a relative's house 3 villages away. But the balance of the valley had been disturbed. Yin requires yang. A death requires a death. 7 days later, a boy in the neighboring house, a strong, healthy 9-year-old, died in his sleep. His mother found him with a shoe in his hand. She had been sewing it for him. He died with 1 shoe on and 1 shoe off. The house stood empty for years. It was a rotting tooth that no one dared to pull. Eventually, the brigade decided to tear it down. They needed space for a new primary school. They claimed it was superstition, that the new China had no place for ghosts. They brought in a wrecking crew. An old man was assigned to watch the site at night. On the 3rd morning, the workers found the old man. He was alive, but his mind was gone. He was bound, wrapped tight from ankles to neck, in hemp thread, thousands of yards of thread that had been stolen from a neighbor's basket miles away. He couldn't speak. He could only make a sound. Asterisk. Hee-hee. Asterisk. When they dug up the foundation of the house, under the storage room, the mystery was laid bare in the sun. They found 2 coffins. They were rotted, the wood soft as sponge. Inside lay the skeletal remains of 2 women. They were dressed in the remnants of silk, one red, one pink. But it was what lay between the coffins that made the workers drop their shovels and run. There was a small ceramic jar, sealed with red paper and wax. The seal was broken. Inside the jar, there was no grain. There was no gold. There was a dried toad, a massive, 3-legged toad, its skin black and shriveled. And nestled in the mouth of the toad was a single, small shoe. A child's shoe. The school was built. The concrete was poured thick. The playground was filled with the noise of shouting children, a wall of yang energy to suppress the yin beneath. But even now, decades later, on nights when the moon is full and the wind blows from the east, the children of the valley know better than to walk past the school gates after dark. They say if you listen closely, past the sound of the wind, you can still hear it. A jump rope hitting the pavement. Squish, squish, and a voice, clear and sweet, singing about red shoes and the cold, cold earth. Hey, hey. The silence that followed Little Flower's death was not peaceful. It was a vacuum, a sudden depressurization of the room that made Ju's ears pop. The air tasted of spent sulfur and the coppery tang of adrenaline that had nowhere to go. The uncle lowered the matchbox. His chest heaved like a bellows, his massive frame trembling with a rage that had no target. He looked at the small, still form on the Times Kang asterisk, then at the roaring fire in the stove, the fire that had ignited only after it was too late. "She's gone," the mother whispered. She didn't scream. She didn't wail. She simply deflated, sliding down the wall until she hit the dirt floor. "My baby, she's gone." Ju stood frozen. He looked at the corn bun in his hand. It was still cold. He squeezed it until it crumbled, the dry crumbs falling through his fingers like grave soil. The guilt was instantaneous and crushing. It settled on his shoulders, a yoke of iron. Asterisk. I couldn't light the fire. I couldn't feed her. Asterisk. But deep down, in the lizard brain that sensed danger before the conscious mind could process it, Ju knew the truth. The fire hadn't failed because of damp straw or bad matches. The fire had been withheld. The entities in this house, the things in red and pink silk, had starved her. They had blocked the warmth. They had orchestrated a famine for one. The father stood up. He was a man who solved problems with his hands, but there was nothing here to fix. He looked at the uncle. A silent communication passed between them, a grim acknowledgement of the ancient, brutal laws of the valley. "We have to move her," the father said. His voice was devoid of emotion, hollowed out by shock. "Not yet," the mother pleaded, reaching out a hand. "Let her sleep. Just for a while. She isn't sleeping, the uncle said gently, but his voice was firm. And you know the rules. A child who dies before the age of 12 cannot be kept in the house overnight. It invites the times the killing energy. It turns the grief into a curse. It was a savage custom, born of a time when death was a frequent visitor and superstition was the only shield against madness. A child's death was viewed as a bad debt, a broken contract with the heavens. To bury them in the family plot was to trap that misfortune in the bloodline. They had to be returned to the wild. Get the mat, the father said to Jiu. Jiu moved like an automaton. He went to the storage room, the very room where the oppression was heaviest, and retrieved an old, woven reed mat. He brought it back to the inner room. The father and uncle lifted Little Flower. She was impossibly light. The sickness had hollowed her out long before her heart stopped. They laid her on the mat. Jiu looked at her face one last time. She didn't look peaceful. Her eyes were closed, but the muscles around them were tight, as if she were merely squeezing them shut during a game of hide-and-seek. Her mouth was slightly open, showing small, milk-white teeth. They rolled the mat. The father took a length of rough hemp rope and bound it. Head, waist, ankles. 3 knots. Asterisk. Tight. Asterisk. We go to the Wild Dog Slope, the uncle said. The Wild Dog Slope was a ravine about 2 miles west of the village. It was a place where the sun rarely touched the bottom, a scar in the earth filled with brambles, sharp rocks, and the bones of the unwanted. It was where the village threw its dead livestock and its dead children. The logic was cruel but pragmatic. The faster the body was consumed by wolves and crows, the faster the soul was released from the flesh to be reincarnated. A body that lingered was a soul that was trapped. I'm coming, Jiu said. No, the father said. You stay with your mother. You watch the other children. But stay. The command was absolute. The father and uncle hoisted the small bundle onto the uncle's broad shoulder. They walked out into the twilight, 2 dark silhouettes against a purple sky that looked like a bruise. Jiu watched them go until the darkness swallowed them. He locked the door. The house felt different now. The heavy, suffocating presence that had plagued them for weeks seemed to have receded slightly, as if the entities were satisfied. Or perhaps they had simply followed the body. The mother sat on the edge of the Times Kang asterisk, rocking back and forth, staring at the empty spot where Little Flower had died. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. She just rocked. Jiu sat by the stove, feeding wood into the fire. He wanted it bright. He wanted it hot. He wanted to burn away the shadows that clung to the corners of the room. 2 hours later, the men returned. They looked exhausted, their boots caked with mud. They washed their hands in a basin of cold water outside the door before entering. This was necessary. You do not bring the dirt of the dead into the home of the living. It is done, the uncle said, sitting heavily at the table. He accepted a bowl of water from Jiu, but didn't drink it. He just held the bowl, staring into the liquid, as if reading the future. Did you place her well? The mother asked, her voice trembling. We put her on the flat stone, the father said, facing east, toward the sunrise. It will be quick. The wolves are active this year. The mother let out a low, keen sound, biting her knuckle to stifle a sob. The image of her child being torn apart was horrific, yet, in their world, it was the only mercy available. It meant freedom. Go to sleep, the father said to the family. We have work tomorrow. Work. The eternal constant. People died. Worlds ended. But the harvest still had to be brought in. That night, the house was a tomb. Jiu lay on the outer edge of the Times Kang asterisk, his eyes wide open. The oil lamp had been extinguished to save fuel, but the moonlight filtered through the paper windows, casting long, distorted shadows across the room. He listened. He was waiting for the laughter, for the whispers, for the singing, but there was only silence. The wind whistled through the eaves, a lonely, high-pitched sound, but it was just wind. The house settled with groans and creaks, but they were the sounds of timber and earth, not the footsteps of the dead. Maybe it was over. Maybe the debt had been paid. Jiu's eyelids grew heavy. Exhaustion, deep and narcotic, began to pull him under. He slept. He woke up to a sound. Scritch. Jew froze. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He lay perfectly still, straining his ears. Scritch, scritch, scritch. It was the sound of fingernails on wood. It was coming from the front door, the heavy wooden door that led to the courtyard. Jew turned his head slowly. The moonlight illuminated the door. The latch was in place. The wooden bar was secure. Pat, pat, pat. Footsteps. Small footsteps. Bare feet slapping against the hard-packed earth of the courtyard, just outside the door. Then, a voice. Mama. It wasn't a shout. It was a whisper, but it carried with unnatural clarity. It sounded like it was coming through a long metal tube, hollow, resonant, and devoid of warmth. Mama. Open the door. Jew stopped breathing. He recognized the cadence. He recognized the pitch, but the timbre was wrong. It was Little Flower's voice, stripped of its soul, replayed on a loop. On the other side of the Times Kang asterisk, his mother sat up. The springs of the mattress groaned. Flower? She whispered. Don't, Father hissed. He grabbed the mother's arm. Don't answer. It's her, the mother sobbed. She's back. She's cold. She wants to come in. She is dead. The father's voice was a harsh whisper, cracking with fear. That thing outside is not your daughter. Mama? The voice came again, insistent, whining. It's dark. The wolves are coming. Open the door. The emotional manipulation was precise and cruel. It targeted the mother's deepest fear. The mother lunged. She tried to scramble off the Times Kang asterisk, her hands reaching for the door bar. No, Jew shouted. He and his father grabbed her. It took both of them to hold her back. She possessed a hysterical strength, thrashing and kicking. Let me go. My baby is outside. You monsters, let me go. Listen to it, the father shouted, pinning her arms. Listen to the voice. That is not a child. Outside. The scratching stopped. There was a long silence. Then, a giggle. Hey, hey. It wasn't the child's giggle. It was the adult laughter. The low, throaty, knowing laughter of the woman in the red tunic. She's ours now, the child's voice said. But the tone had changed. It was mocking, arrogant. She wears the shoes. Then the footsteps moved away. Asterisk, pat, 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 asterisk, fading into the darkness of the courtyard. The mother collapsed, weeping into the quilt. The father sat against the door, holding the iron spade, shaking uncontrollably. Jew didn't sleep for the rest of the night. He lay staring at the door, waiting for the wood to splinter, for the latch to lift. But nothing else came. Morning brought no relief, only a gray, sunless light that made the world look like a faded photograph. The father and the uncle left early. They carried their tools, but they weren't going to the fields. They were going to the wild dog slope. They had to check. It was part of the ritual. If the body was gone, the nightmare was over. They returned 2 hours later. Their faces were the color of old parchment. The mother was waiting in the courtyard, her hands twisting her apron. Is she gone? The uncle shook his head. He spat on the ground, as if trying to clear a bad taste from his mouth. The wolves didn't touch her, he said. His voice was gravel. We saw tracks, wolf tracks. They circled the stone. They came within 3 feet of her, and then they turned and ran. Ran? Animals know, the father said softly. They won't eat meat that is tainted. Is she whole? The mother asked, a flicker of grotesque hope in her eyes. She is whole, the uncle said. He looked at the father, then back to the mother. But she moved. The air in the courtyard seemed to drop 10 degrees. What do you mean? We left her facing east, the uncle said, illustrating with his hands. Toward the sunrise, when we got there, the mat was unrolled, the rope was loose, and she had turned. He pointed toward the house. She was facing west. She was facing here. Her eyes were open. She was watching the path. The mother covered her mouth. We tied her again, the father said quickly. Tighter this time. We put rocks on the mat, heavy rocks. She won't move again. But the assurance felt thin, like paper over a fire. The second night was an escalation of terror that defied all reason. They had barricaded the door. The father had nailed extra planks across the frame. They had moved the heavy wardrobe in front of the entrance to the inner room. It didn't matter. Around midnight, the sounds began times inside, times the house. Ju heard the distinct, wet sound of bare feet slapping on the dirt floor of the outer room, the kitchen area. Slap, slap, slap. The family lay in the inner room, huddled together, scarcely daring to breathe. The barrier between them and the entity was a thin wooden door and a wardrobe. "Hungry," the voice whispered. It was right on the other side of the door. So hungry. Then came the sounds of domesticity, twisted into a horror show. They heard the heavy lid of the water jar being dragged aside. Asterisk. Scrape. Asterisk. They heard the ladle dip into the water. Asterisk. Splash. Asterisk. They heard gulping. Loud, exaggerated swallowing sounds. Asterisk. Glug. 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 Asterisk. Ah, the voice sighed. Cold. Then, the sound of the cupboard opening. The clatter of ceramic bowls. "Brother didn't heat the bun," the voice crooned. "Brother let me starve." Ju squeezed his eyes shut, tears leaking out. "Asterisk, I tried." Asterisk, he screamed internally. Asterisk, I tried to light the fire. Asterisk, but the ladies are nice, the voice continued. The ladies gave me seeds, black seeds. Asterisk, crunch, crunch, asterisk. The sound of chewing. It was a wet, grinding noise, like someone chewing on raw meat and gristle. Asterisk, crunch, snap, asterisk. Good, the voice whispered. Then, the scratching started on the inner door. Scritch, scritch. "Let me in," Little Flower whispered. "I have extra seeds. I want to share." The mother had to be gagged. The father held his hand over her mouth as she wept and convulsed. If she answered, if she invited it in, the barrier would fall. The scratching continued for hours. It was a test of endurance, a siege of the mind. Finally, as the first gray light of dawn touched the window paper, the presence receded. The air grew lighter. The smell of stagnant water faded. When they finally worked up the courage to move the wardrobe and open the door, the kitchen was empty. The water jar was covered. The ladle was dry. The cupboard was closed. But on the floor, right in front of the inner room door, there was a small pile of wet, black earth. And in the center of the earth lay a single, dead toad. Its head had been bitten off. By the third day, the atmosphere in the valley had shifted. The villagers knew. They didn't come near the Guo house. They walked on the other side of the river. The dogs in the village wouldn't stop barking, a continuous, mournful chorus that grated on the nerves. The uncle arrived at noon. He didn't bring tools this time. He brought a jerry can of kerosene and a bundle of dry, resinous pine wood. His face was set in a mask of grim determination. He looked like an executioner. "It ends today," he said. "What are you doing?" the mother asked, her eyes red-rimmed and hollow. "Fire," the uncle said. "Fire purifies. The earth refuses her. The wolves refuse her. That means she is not flesh anymore. She is a vessel. We have to break the vessel." "You can't burn her," the mother shrieked. "She's my child." "She is not your child," the uncle roared, slamming his hand against the doorframe. The violence of it silenced the mother. "Your child is gone. What is on that slope is a demon wearing her skin. Do you want it to come in tonight? Do you want it to take Ju? To take the others?" The mother slumped, defeated. The logic of survival outweighed the grief of the mother. "Come," the uncle said to the father and Ju. "We go." Ju didn't want to go. He wanted to run away, to hide in the mountains until the world made sense again. But he followed. He was the eldest son. He had to bear witness. The climb to Wild Dog Slope felt like a funeral march. The air was still and heavy, the sky a flat sheet of slate gray. They reached the flat stone. The rocks they had placed on the mat were gone. They had been rolled away, scattered downhill. The mat was open. Little Flower lay on the stone. She had changed. She was no longer pale. Her cheeks were flushed with a vibrant, unnatural pink. Her lips were red, as if she had just eaten berries. She looked healthier than she had in life. She looked like a porcelain doll that had been painted by a madman. But her position... She had crawled. She was 10 feet away from the stone, her fingers dug into the dirt, her body dragging a furrow in the earth. She was heading downhill, toward the village. "God in heaven," the father whispered, making a warding sign. The uncle didn't hesitate. He was a man of action, and fear was a luxury he couldn't afford. He marched forward and kicked the body back onto the stone. It flopped with a heavy, wet sound. He began stacking the pine wood around her. He built a pyre, boxing her in. "Help me," he barked at the father. They worked quickly, piling the wood high. They covered her legs, her chest. Only her face was visible, staring up at the gray sky with those painted, shut eyes. The uncle uncorked the kerosene. The smell was sharp and chemical, overpowering the scent of pine and damp earth. He doused the wood, he doused the body. The liquid soaked into her tunic, turning the fabric dark. "Forgive me," the uncle whispered. It was a prayer not to the gods, but to the memory of the niece he had once bounced on his knee. He struck a match. This time, the flame did not die. He threw it. Asterisk. Whoosh. Asterisk. The kerosene ignited with a concussive thump. A wall of orange flame roared upward, sucking the oxygen out of the ravine. Black smoke, thick and oily, billowed into the sky. Zhu stepped back, shielding his face from the intense heat. The fire roared like a living thing, hungry and violent. And then, through the roar of the flames, Zhu saw it. Movement. The body did not curl up as muscles contracted in the heat. It didn't arch. It sat up. Little Flower sat bolt upright in the heart of the inferno. The wood tumbled away from her chest. She turned her head slowly, mechanically, scanning the three of them. Her eyes opened. There were no eyes. The fire had taken them first, or perhaps they had never been there. There were only black, bubbling sockets. She opened her mouth. A sound emerged that would haunt Zhu for the rest of his life. It wasn't a scream of pain. It wasn't a cry for help. It was a screech. A metallic, grinding noise, like a train braking on rusted tracks, magnified 1,000 times. It was the sound of something ancient and furious being evicted from its home. "Ye Daru," the body thrashed. It flailed its arms, beating against the flames, trying to push the burning wood away. It tried to stand. "Burn!" the uncle roared. He grabbed a long, thick branch and thrust it into the fire, pinning the body down. "Burn, you evil thing! Burn!" The body fought back. It grabbed the branch with charred hands, possessing a strength that was impossible for a child, impossible for a corpse. It shoved against the uncle, forcing the big man to brace his feet in the dirt. "Help him!" the father screamed. Zhu and his father grabbed the branch. Together, the three of them pushed. They drove the thrashing, screeching thing back into the heart of the fire. The struggle lasted for minutes that felt like hours. The smell was horrific, roast pork and burning hair. Finally, the structure of the body collapsed. The spine gave way. The screeching turned into a wet gurgle. Then, silence. The fire consumed everything. They stood there until the flames died down to embers, until there was nothing left but white ash and fragments of bone. The uncle dropped the branch. He was weeping openly now, great racking sobs that shook his massive frame. "It's done," he choked out. "It's done." But as the smoke cleared, drifting down the valley toward the village, Zhu felt a cold wind brush against the back of his neck. He knew, with a certainty that chilled his blood, that energy does not disappear. It only changes form. The family moved the next day. They didn't pack. They didn't clean. They took only the clothes on their backs and fled to a relative's house 3 villages away. They left the furniture. They left the grain in the jars. They left the memories. But the valley demands balance. Yin requires yang. A death requires a death. 7 days later, a boy in the neighboring house, a strong, healthy 9-year-old named Wei, died in his sleep. His mother found him in the morning. He was cold. In his hand, gripped tightly in rigor mortis, was a shoe. It was a cloth shoe his mother had been sewing for him. She had finished the left one. The right one was still just a sole and a needle. He died holding the unfinished shoe. The tragedy broke the village. The boy's mother went mad. She would stand by the river for hours, calling for her son to come back and put on his shoes, terrified that his feet would get cold on the road to the underworld. The Guo house, the source of the infection, stood empty. It became a necrotic spot in the village. Birds wouldn't land on the roof. Weeds grew black and twisted in the courtyard. It stood for years, a rotting tooth that no one dared to pull. Eventually, the era changed. The Cultural Revolution swept through the land, declaring war on the four olds: old customs, old culture, old habits, and old ideas. Superstition was branded as counter-revolutionary. The brigade decided to tear the house down. They needed space for a new primary school. They claimed that the bright red sun of the revolution would burn away any ghosts. They brought in a wrecking crew. An old man, a local bachelor with no family, was assigned to watch the construction site at night. On the third morning, the workers arrived to find the site silent. They found the old man in the corner of what used to be the storage room. He was alive, but his mind was shattered. He was bound. He was wrapped tight from ankles to neck in hemp thread. Thousands of yards of rough, scratchy thread. It was wound with machine-like precision, layer upon layer, creating a cocoon. Where had the thread come from? A grandmother in a village 5 miles away reported that her entire basket of hemp thread, months of work, had vanished from her locked house that same night. The old man couldn't speak. His eyes were wide and rolling. He could only make one sound, over and over. Hey, hey. The brigade leader, furious and determined to prove a point, ordered the foundation dug up. "We will show the people there are no ghosts," he shouted. "Only rot." They dug. Under the storage room, 4 feet down, the spades hit wood. The mystery was laid bare in the harsh light of the noon sun. They found 2 coffins. The wood was rotted, soft as sponge. Inside lay the skeletal remains of 2 women. Even after decades of decay, the remnants of their silk burial clothes were visible. One was stained, a deep, muddy red. The other, a faded pink. They were concubines, forgotten, buried in secret, likely murdered to hide a shame or settle a feud. But it was what lay times between times, the coffins, that made the workers drop their shovels and back away. There was a small ceramic jar, sealed with red paper and wax. The seal had been broken from the inside. The brigade leader smashed the jar. Inside, there was no grain. There was no gold. There was a dried toad, a massive, 3-legged toad, its skin black and shriveled like old leather. It was at times Jin Chan, times a money toad perverted by dark arts into a guardian of malice. And nestled in the mouth of the toad, jammed deep into its throat, was a single object. A small, embroidered cloth shoe. A child's shoe. The shoe was removed. The bones were burned. The toad was crushed to dust. The site was paved over with thick concrete. The school was built. The playground was filled with the noise of shouting children, a wall of pure times yang times energy to suppress the times yin times beneath. The party declared victory over superstition. But concrete cracks and memories endure. Even now, decades later, on nights when the moon is full and the wind blows from the east, the children of the valley know better than to walk past the school gates after dark. The locals say the school has a heavy atmosphere. Teachers complain of cold spots in the classrooms. Students talk to invisible friends in the hallways. And sometimes, late at night, the janitor will hear it. Out on the playground, where the asphalt covers the old foundation, the rhythmic slap of a jump rope hitting the pavement. Squish, squish, and a voice, clear and sweet, singing a song that no living child has been taught. Asterisk. The red shoes walk on the snow. Asterisk. Asterisk. The bride has nowhere to go. Asterisk. Hey, hey. Stories like these don't end when the video ends. They stay with you. Because the most unsettling part isn't what happened. It's what it says about people. Somewhere out there, these situations are happening right now, unnoticed, unquestioned. So I want to ask you something. Which story disturbed you the most and why? Let me know in the comments. If you want to hear more real stories that reveal the darker side of human nature, make sure to follow the channel. I'll see you in the next one.